Summary of the Clash of Civilizations and the Remaking of World Order by Samuel P. Huntington. Enjoyed the video. Please subscribing to my channel for more great content like this. You'll be notified when I upload new videos. The Clash of Civilizations and the Remaking of World Order by Samuel P. Huntington is a seminal work in the field of international relations and geopolitics. Here's a long summary and key topics of the book. Samuel P. Huntington's thesis, first presented in a 1993 Foreign Affairs article and later expanded into this book, argues that in the post-Cold War world, the primary source of conflict will be cultural and religious differences between civilizations, rather than ideological or economic factors. Huntington identifies several major civilizations in the modern world. 1. Western, including Europe and North America. 2. Orthodox, centered in Russia. 3. Islamic. 4. Confucian, Chinese. 5. Japanese. 6. Hindu. 7. African. 8. Latin American. He argues that these civilizations are distinguished by fundamental differences in history, language, culture, tradition, and, most importantly, religion. As globalization brings these civilizations into closer contact, Huntington predicts that their differences will become the primary source of international conflict. The book posits that the era of Western dominance is coming to an end, with other civilizations, particularly Islamic and Confucian, rising in power and influence. Huntington suggests that conflicts are most likely to occur along the fault lines between civilizations, where cultural differences are most pronounced. Huntington challenges the idea of universal Western values and argues that concepts like democracy, human rights, and free markets may not be as appealing or applicable to other civilizations. He warns against Western attempts to promote these values globally, suggesting that such efforts could lead to backlash and conflict. The author also discusses the concept of torn countries, nations that are split between different civilizations or are trying to shift from one civilization to another. He uses examples like Turkey, torn between Islamic and Western civilizations, and Russia, torn between Western and Orthodox civilizations, to illustrate this concept. Huntington proposes that to maintain peace in this new world order, it's crucial for Western powers to 1. Maintain Western technological and military superiority. 2. Promote Western values within the West rather than trying to universalize them. 3. Protect the uniqueness of Western civilization. 4. Limit expansion of non-Western military strength. 5. Exploit differences among non-Western civilizations. 6. Support civilization ally kindred groups. The book concludes by emphasizing the need for a greater understanding of non-Western civilizations and a more nuanced approach to international relations that takes into account these fundamental cultural differences. Key topics. 1. Clash of Civilizations, the central thesis that future global conflicts will primarily arise from cultural and religious differences between civilizations. 2. Decline of Western dominance, the argument that the era of Western global supremacy is ending, with other civilizations rising in power and influence. 3. Cultural identity, the importance of cultural and religious identity in shaping global politics and international relations. 4. Fault lines, the concept of conflict zones between different civilizations where tensions are most likely to arise. 5. Critique of universalism, a challenge to the idea that Western values and systems are universally applicable or desirable. 6. Torn countries, the exploration of nations caught between different civilizational identities. 7. Balancing power, strategies for maintaining global stability in a multi-civilizational world. 8. Religion as a geopolitical force, the role of religion in shaping civilizational identities and conflicts. 9. Globalization's impact, how increased global interconnectedness affects inter-civilizational relations. 10. Future of international relations, predictions and prescriptions for navigating a world order based on civilizational divisions. This book has been highly influential in shaping debates about international relations and global politics since its publication, though it has also been criticized for oversimplifying complex global dynamics and potentially promoting a self-fulfilling prophecy of conflict. Part 1. Clash of Civilizations. Huntington introduces a provocative theory that reshapes our understanding of global politics in the post-Cold War era. He argues that the fundamental source of conflict in this new world will not be primarily ideological or economic, but cultural. Huntington begins by painting a picture of a world emerging from the shadow of the Cold War. The fall of the Berlin Wall and the collapse of the Soviet Union had ended the bipolar struggle between capitalism and communism. Many Western thinkers at the time were optimistic, believing this marked the end of history and the triumph of liberal democracy. However, Huntington saw a different future unfolding. He posits that as people increasingly define themselves by their cultural heritage, the world is reorganizing along civilizational lines. These civilizations, according to Huntington, are the broadest level of cultural identity people have, short of what distinguishes humans from other species. He identifies several major civilizations: Western, Orthodox, Islamic, Confucian, Chinese, Japanese, Hindu, African, and Latin American. To illustrate his point, Huntington provides numerous examples. One striking instance he discusses is the war in Yugoslavia following the breakup of the country. What might have appeared as a conflict over territory or political power was, in Huntington's view, fundamentally a clash between three distinct civilizations: Western Christianity, Croats, Orthodox Christianity, Serbs, and Islam, Bosnians. The brutality of this conflict and the difficulty in resolving it stemmed from these deep-rooted cultural differences. Another example Huntington explores is the relationship between the West and the Islamic world. He points to events like the Gulf War, where a US-led coalition confronted Iraq, as not just a response to aggression but a clash between Western and Islamic civilizations. He argues that such conflicts are likely to increase as Islamic societies, feeling threatened by Western cultural incursions, assert their identity more strongly. Huntington also discusses China's rise as a potential civilizational challenger to the West. He notes how economic growth has fueled Chinese confidence in their own model of development, leading to increased assertions of Chinese cultural values and resistance to Western influence. This manifests in areas ranging from human rights debates to territorial disputes in the South China Sea. The author emphasizes that these civilizational differences run deep. They encompass fundamental views on the relationship between God and man, the individual and the group, the citizen and the state, parents and children, husband and wife, as well as differing views on the relative importance of rights and responsibilities, liberty and authority, equality and hierarchy. Huntington argues that globalization, rather than creating a uniform global culture, is actually heightening civilizational consciousness. As people around the world are brought into closer contact, they become more aware of their cultural differences. This awareness can lead to both a reaffirmation of indigenous values and increased tension with those perceived as other. He warns that failure to recognize the importance of these civilizational divisions could lead to dangerous misunderstandings in international relations. For instance, he suggests that Western efforts to promote democracy and human rights globally might be perceived by other civilizations not as universal values, but as a form of Western imperialism. Huntington's introduction to the Clash of Civilizations theory sets the stage for a radical rethinking of global politics. It challenges readers to consider culture and identity as primary forces shaping the future of international relations, rather than seeing the world primarily through the lens of nation-states or economic systems. While controversial and much debated, this theory has significantly influenced how many policymakers and scholars approach global affairs in the 21st century. Part 2: The historical context of civilizational conflict. Huntington delves deep into the historical context of civilizational conflict, providing a rich tapestry of examples to support his thesis. He argues that while the 20th century was dominated by conflicts between ideologies, the patterns of conflict throughout much of human history have been rooted in differences between civilizations. Huntington takes his readers on a journey through time, starting with ancient civilizations. He points out that some of the most enduring and consequential conflicts in history have been between different civilizational groups. One of the most prominent examples he discusses is the centuries-long conflict between Christian Europe and the Islamic world. This clash, Huntington argues, began with the rise of Islam in the 7th century and continued through various phases, including the Arab conquests, the Crusades, the Ottoman expansion into Europe, and European colonialism in the Middle East. He vividly describes how the fall of Constantinople to the Ottoman Turks in 1453 marked a turning point in this civilizational struggle, symbolizing the advance of Islamic civilization at the expense of Orthodox Christian civilization. To further illustrate his point, Huntington turns to the interaction between Western and Chinese civilizations. He recounts how, in the 19th century, Western powers forced China to open its markets and accept extraterritoriality for Westerners. This period, known as the Century of Humiliation in China, left a lasting impact on Chinese consciousness and continues to influence China's relationship with the West today. Huntington also explores the complex relationship between Western and Orthodox civilizations, embodied in the historical tensions between Western Europe and Russia. He traces this back to the division of Christendom into Western, Catholic and later Protestant, and Eastern, Orthodox, branches, and how this split has manifested in geopolitical tensions over centuries, from the Napoleonic Wars to the Cold War. The author doesn't limit his analysis to conflicts between major civilizations. He also examines intracivilizational conflicts, such as the wars between European powers. However, he argues that these conflicts, while often brutal, were limited by a shared cultural context that made reconciliation and integration possible. As evidence, he points to the formation of the European Union in the aftermath of World War II, something he suggests would be much more difficult between nations from different civilizations. Huntington pays particular attention to the role of the West in shaping global history. He describes how Western civilization, through technological advancements in military power, came to dominate global affairs from the 16th to the 20th centuries. This period saw Western civilization export its values, institutions, and religion around the world, often through colonialism and imperialism. However, Huntington argues that this period of Western dominance is coming to an end. He points to the decolonization movements of the 20th century as the beginning of a pushback against Western hegemony. He cites examples such as the Iranian Revolution of 1979, which explicitly rejected Western influence in favor of an Islamic model of governance. To underscore the persistent nature of civilizational identities, Huntington discusses the rediscovery of roots in the post-Soviet states. After the fall of the Soviet Union, many countries in Eastern Europe and Central Asia began to reassert their pre-communist cultural identities, often defined in civilizational terms. For instance, he describes how countries like Poland, Hungary, and the Czech Republic quickly moved to align themselves with Western civilization, while Russia reasserted its identity as the core state of Orthodox civilization. Huntington also explores the concept of torn countries, nations that are divided over which civilization they belong to. He uses Turkey as a prime example, describing its long-standing struggle between secularism and Islam, and its ambiguous position between Western and Islamic civilizations. This tension, he argues, has deep historical roots going back to the modernizing reforms of Ataturk in the early 20th century. Through these varied historical examples, Huntington builds a compelling case for the enduring relevance of civilizational identity in shaping global conflicts. He argues that understanding these deep-seated cultural divisions is crucial for navigating the complexities of international relations in the post-Cold War world. By grounding his theory in historical context, Huntington provides a framework for understanding not just past conflicts, but also potential future flashpoints in global politics. Part 3: The Emerging Pattern of Global Politics. Huntington presents a compelling vision of the emerging pattern of global politics in the post-Cold War era. He argues that the world is entering a new phase where the fundamental source of conflict will be neither ideological nor primarily economic, but cultural. Huntington begins by describing the shifting landscape of international relations following the fall of the Soviet Union. The bipolar world order that had defined much of the 20th century had come to an end, and with it, the clear-cut ideological divisions that had shaped global politics. In this new world, Huntington argues, people's cultural and religious identities would become the primary source of conflict. To illustrate this emerging pattern, Huntington points to several key developments and examples. One of the most significant is the resurgence of religious identity, particularly in the Islamic world. He describes what he calls the Islamic resurgence, a broad cultural, social, and political movement that had been gaining momentum since the 1970s. The Iranian Revolution of 1979 serves as a pivotal example in his narrative, representing a rejection of Western secular values in favor of an Islamic model of governance. Huntington also discusses the rise of China as a potential challenger to Western dominance. He argues that China's economic growth has been accompanied by a growing sense of cultural confidence, leading to what he terms Confucian assertiveness. This manifests in China's increasing willingness to challenge Western norms in areas such as human rights and its territorial claims in the South China Sea. The dispute over the Senkaku/Diaoyu Islands between China and Japan is presented as an example of how civilizational differences can exacerbate territorial conflicts. Another key aspect of the emerging global order, according to Huntington, is the formation of civilizational blocs. He points to the expansion of the European Union not just as an economic project, but as a reassertion of a common Western Christian heritage. Similarly, he discusses how Russia, after a brief period of Westernization in the 1990s, began to reassert its role as the core state of Orthodox civilization, exemplified by its actions in former Soviet states like Ukraine and Georgia. Huntington pays particular attention to what he calls fault line conflicts, clashes that occur along the boundaries between civilizations. He provides numerous examples, including the conflicts in the Balkans, the Kashmir dispute between India and Pakistan, and the tensions in Xinjiang between the Chinese government and the Uyghur Muslim population. These conflicts, he argues, are particularly intractable because they involve deep-seated cultural differences. The author also explores the concept of kin-country rallying, where states and peoples belonging to one civilization support their civilizational kin in conflicts with people from a different civilization. He cites the international Muslim support for Bosnia and Chechnya, and Western support for Croatia and Slovenia during the Yugoslav conflicts as examples of this phenomenon. Huntington discusses the changing nature of international institutions in this new world order. He argues that organizations like the United Nations Security Council, the International Monetary Fund, and the World Bank, which were created in a Western-dominated world, will need to adapt to reflect the rising power of non-Western civilizations. He points to the growing calls for reform of these institutions, particularly from emerging powers like China and India, as evidence of this shift. The author also predicts a decline in the universalist pretensions of Western civilization. He argues that as other civilizations become more powerful, they will increasingly reject Western values and institutions that they see as alien. As an example, he discusses the concept of Asian values, promoted by leaders like Malaysia's Mahathir Mohamad and Singapore's Lee Kuan Yew, which challenge the universality of Western-style democracy and human rights. Huntington doesn't shy away from discussing potential future conflicts. He warns of the possibility of a global civilizational war, potentially arising from an escalation of a fault-line conflict. He speculates that such a war might involve core states of major civilizations, such as China, the United States, and various Islamic states. However, Huntington also offers a vision for managing these civilizational differences. He advocates for a recognition and acceptance of the multi-civilizational nature of global politics. He suggests that Western powers should focus on preserving Western civilization rather than trying to reshape other civilizations in its image. He argues for a policy of finding commonalities between civilizations while respecting differences, to create a more stable world order. Through these various examples and analyses, Huntington paints a picture of a world moving away from the ideological conflicts of the 20th century towards a more complex, multi-civilizational order. His narrative challenges readers to rethink their understanding of global politics and to consider the profound impact that cultural identities can have on international relations. While controversial, Huntington's vision has significantly influenced how many policymakers and scholars approach the complexities of the 21st century world order. Part 4: Modernization and its impact on civilizations. Huntington dedicates significant attention to the complex relationship between modernization and civilization. He argues that while modernization has had a profound impact on all civilizations, it has not led to a uniform global culture or the wholesale adoption of Western values as many had predicted. Huntington begins by challenging the long-held assumption that modernization is synonymous with Westernization. He argues that while the processes of modernization, industrialization, urbanization, increasing literacy, and technological advancement originated in the West, they have spread to other civilizations without necessarily bringing Western cultural values along with them. To illustrate this point, Huntington examines the case of Japan. He describes how Japan, following the Meiji Restoration in 1868, embarked on a deliberate program of modernization without Westernization. The Japanese adopted Western technology and industrial practices but maintained their distinct cultural identity. This modernization without Westernization allowed Japan to become an industrial and military power while retaining its unique civilizational characteristics. Huntington points to Japan's economic success in the latter half of the 20th century as evidence that modernization can occur within the framework of non-Western cultural traditions. The author then turns his attention to the Islamic world, where the relationship between modernization and traditional culture has been particularly contentious. He discusses the Iranian Revolution of 1979 as a prime example of the rejection of Western-style modernization in favor of an Islamic model of development. Huntington argues that the revolution represented not a rejection of modernity itself, but rather an attempt to reconcile modern technology and social organization with Islamic values and traditions. Huntington also explores the impact of modernization on China. He describes how China's economic reforms, beginning in the late 1970s under Deng Xiaoping, led to rapid modernization and economic growth. However, rather than leading to Westernization, this process has been accompanied by a resurgence of traditional Chinese cultural values and a growing assertion of Chinese civilizational identity. Huntington points to the concept of socialism with Chinese characteristics as an example of how China has sought to modernize on its own terms, blending elements of market economics with authoritarian political control and Confucian social values. The author pays particular attention to the role of religion in the modernization process. Contrary to the expectations of many Western thinkers who predicted that modernization would lead to secularization, Huntington argues that modernization has often strengthened religious identity. He cites the global resurgence of religion, particularly in the Islamic world and among evangelical Christians, as evidence of this trend. The growth of Pentecostalism in Latin America and the increasing religious fervor in post-Soviet Russia are presented as examples of how modernization can coexist with, and even reinforce, traditional religious beliefs. Huntington also discusses the concept of indigenization, where the second generation of modernizers in non-Western societies reject Western influences and seek to root modernization in their own cultural traditions. He provides examples from various parts of the world, such as the promotion of Asian values by leaders like Malaysia's Mahathir Mohamad, who argued for a distinctly Asian path to modernity that emphasized community and order over individual rights. The impact of modernization on language and education is another area Huntington explores. He notes how the spread of modern communication technologies and the need for a lingua franca in international business have led to the global dominance of English. However, he also points out countervailing trends, such as the efforts of many countries to promote their native languages and resist linguistic anglicization. The author cites examples like the French government's attempts to limit the use of English words in official communications and media. Huntington also examines the phenomenon of torn countries, nations caught between the pull of Western modernization and their traditional civilizational identities. Turkey serves as a prime example in his narrative. He describes how Turkey, under Kemal Ataturk's leadership, embarked on an aggressive program of Westernization in the early 20th century. However, in recent decades, Turkey has experienced a resurgence of Islamic identity, leading to tensions between its secular modernizing elite and more traditionally oriented segments of society. The author concludes that modernization does not necessarily lead to a convergence of cultures or the triumph of Western values. Instead, he argues that modernization often strengthens traditional cultural identities and can even lead to a rejection of Western norms. Huntington suggests that the challenge for the future will be to find ways for different civilizations to pursue modernization while maintaining their distinct cultural identities. Through these varied examples and analyses, Huntington paints a nuanced picture of the complex relationship between modernization and civilizational identity. He challenges readers to reconsider assumptions about the universality of Western-style modernization and to recognize the diverse ways in which different cultures are navigating the challenges of the modern world. This understanding, he argues, is crucial for managing the potential conflicts arising from the interaction of modernizing societies with diverse civilizational backgrounds in the global arena. Part 5: The Western Civilization and its Challenges. Huntington dedicates considerable attention to Western civilization and the unique challenges it faces in the post-Cold War world. He argues that while the West remains the most powerful civilization, it is facing relative decline and must navigate a complex landscape of rising non-Western powers and internal challenges. Huntington begins by defining Western civilization, tracing its roots to classical Greco-Roman culture and Western Christianity. He emphasizes the unique features that have shaped Western society, including the rule of law, individual rights, representative government, and the separation of church and state. The author argues that these elements have contributed to the West's global dominance over the past several centuries. However, Huntington contends that the era of Western dominance is coming to an end. He points to several factors contributing to this relative decline. One key example he discusses is demographics. The author notes that while the West's population is aging and growing slowly, other civilizations, particularly the Islamic world, are experiencing rapid population growth. He cites UN population projections showing that the West's share of the world's population is expected to decline significantly in the coming decades. To illustrate the implications of these demographic shifts, Huntington discusses immigration patterns in Europe. He describes how large-scale immigration from North Africa and the Middle East to countries like France, Germany, and the UK has led to tensions over integration and national identity. The author points to events such as the controversy over Muslim headscarves in French schools as examples of the cultural clashes arising from these demographic changes. Another challenge Huntington identifies is the erosion of Western cultural unity. He argues that multiculturalism and the rejection of the Western canon in academia are weakening the core values that have traditionally defined Western civilization. As an example, he discusses debates in the United States over curriculum reform, citing controversies such as the one at Stanford University in the late 1980s over the teaching of Western civilization courses. Huntington also explores the economic dimension of the West's relative decline. While acknowledging the continued economic strength of Western countries, he points to the rapid economic growth of East Asian countries as a sign of shifting global economic power. He uses Japan's economic rise in the 1980s and China's sustained growth since the 1990s as prime examples of this trend. The author pays particular attention to the challenge posed by what he terms Asian affirmation. He describes how economic success has led to increased cultural confidence in many Asian societies, resulting in a rejection of Western values and a reassertion of traditional Asian cultural norms. Huntington cites the concept of Asian values, promoted by leaders like Singapore's Lee Kuan Yew, which emphasizes social harmony and collective well-being over individual rights, as an example of this trend. Another significant challenge Huntington identifies is the resurgence of religion, particularly Islam, as a counter to Western secular values. He discusses the Iranian Revolution of 1979 as a watershed moment, marking the beginning of a broader Islamic resurgence that challenges Western influence in the Muslim world. The author points to the controversy over Salman Rushdie's novel The Satanic Verses as an example of the clash between Western notions of free speech and Islamic religious sensibilities. Huntington also explores the West's struggle to promote its values globally in the face of growing resistance. He argues that concepts like human rights and democracy, which the West sees as universal, are often viewed by other civilizations as distinctly Western values. The author cites the mixed results of Western efforts to promote democracy in countries like Russia and Iraq as evidence of the difficulties in exporting Western political models to non-Western contexts. The book also discusses the internal divisions within the West, particularly between Europe and the United States. Huntington notes growing differences in attitudes towards religion, the use of military force, and the role of the state in society. He points to disagreements over the Iraq War in 2003 as an example of these transatlantic tensions. Despite these challenges, Huntington does not predict the imminent collapse of Western civilization. Instead, he advocates for a strategy of preservation and renewal. He argues that the West needs to maintain its military and economic strength while also reinvigorating its core cultural values. The author suggests that the West should focus on preserving its unique civilization rather than trying to remake the world in its image. Huntington concludes that the greatest challenge for the West is to accept that Western civilization is unique but not universal. He argues that the West needs to find ways to coexist with other civilizations in a multipolar, multi-civilizational world while maintaining its own cultural identity and values. Through these various examples and analyses, Huntington presents a complex picture of Western civilization at a crossroads. He challenges Western readers to confront the realities of relative decline and to rethink strategies for engaging with an increasingly diverse and assertive global community. While his views have been subject to debate, Huntington's analysis has significantly influenced discussions about the future of Western civilization and its place in the world order. Part 6: Future Global Order Civilizational Scenarios. In The Clash of Civilizations and the Remaking of World Order, Samuel P. Huntington offers a thought-provoking exploration of potential future global orders based on civilizational dynamics. He presents several scenarios that could shape the world in the coming decades, each rooted in his central thesis of civilizational conflict and cooperation. Huntington begins by emphasizing that the future global order will be fundamentally multipolar and multi-civilizational. He argues that the era of Western dominance is coming to an end, and the world is moving towards a more complex system where multiple civilizations will vie for power and influence. One scenario Huntington explores is the possibility of a clash of civilizations on a global scale. He warns that conflicts along the fault lines between civilizations could escalate into larger, more dangerous confrontations. As an example, he speculates about a potential conflict between China and the United States, possibly triggered by a dispute over Taiwan or the South China Sea. Such a conflict, he suggests, could draw on other nations along civilizational lines, with Japan potentially aligning with the US and North Korea with China. Another scenario Huntington discusses is the formation of civilizational blocs. He envisions a world where countries increasingly align themselves with others sharing their civilizational identity. As an example, he points to the expansion of the European Union, which he sees not just as an economic project but as a reassertion of a common Western Christian heritage. Similarly, he speculates about the potential for increased cooperation among Islamic nations or the formation of a Confucian-Islamic connection between China and certain Muslim countries. Huntington also explores the possibility of a global civilizational war, which he describes as the most dangerous scenario. He suggests that such a war might arise from an escalation of a local conflict between groups from different civilizations, drawing in the core states of those civilizations. As a hypothetical example, he describes how a conflict between India and Pakistan over Kashmir could potentially escalate, drawing in other powers like China, supporting Pakistan, and Russia or the US, supporting India. The author also considers more optimistic scenarios. One such scenario is what he calls civilizational cooperation. In this future, major civilizations recognize their differences but find ways to coexist peacefully and cooperate on global issues. Huntington points to initiatives like the Alliance of Civilizations, launched by Spain and Turkey in 2005, as an example of efforts to promote inter-civilizational dialogue and understanding. Huntington pays particular attention to the role of core states in shaping the future global order. He argues that these powerful countries at the center of each civilization will play crucial roles in managing both inter-civilizational and inter-civilizational relations. For instance, he discusses how the United States, as the core state of Western civilization, might need to balance its global interests with the need to maintain Western cohesion. The author also explores the concept of civilizational rallying, where countries seek support from others within their civilization during conflicts with other civilizations. He cites the international Muslim support for Bosnia during the Yugoslav wars as a historical example and speculates about how such dynamics might play out in future conflicts. Huntington discusses the potential for a global culture to emerge, but he is skeptical of its depth and significance. He argues that while certain aspects of culture, particularly consumer culture, may spread globally, deep-seated civilizational differences will persist. As an example, he points to the widespread adoption of Western popular culture in many parts of the world, while noting that this often coexists with, rather than replaces, traditional cultural values. The book also considers the future of torn countries, nations caught between different civilizational identities. Huntington speculates about the paths countries like Turkey, Russia, and Mexico might take, whether aligning more closely with Western civilization or reasserting their distinct civilizational identities. Huntington concludes by advocating for a strategy of civilizational coexistence. He argues that Western powers, in particular, need to abandon attempts to impose their values universally and instead focus on preserving Western civilization while finding ways to coexist with other civilizations. He suggests that understanding and respecting civilizational differences will be crucial for maintaining global stability. Through these various scenarios and examples, Huntington presents a complex and nuanced view of potential future global orders. he challenges readers to think beyond traditional paradigms of international relations and consider the profound impact that cultural and civilizational factors may have on shaping the world of tomorrow. While his predictions are speculative and have been subject to debate, Huntington's analysis has significantly influenced how many policymakers and scholars approach long-term global strategic planning. Thank you for listening. I hope this content is useful to you. If you like this kind of content, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel to support our team.